Uh-huh. Oh, look at that. Oh, hello. I was just interrupting my endless scrolling on my phone to introduce you to TikTok on Trial. My name is Rob Hart. I am the midday anchor here at WBBM News Radio, also the host of the Noon Business Hour. And over the next 45 minutes, we will talk about TikTok, what it means for the people who consume it, what it means for kids, what it means for parents, what it means for policymakers, and what it means for you. And we are joined this afternoon by a number of distinguished guests, beginning with Jerry Irvine, who is the CIO of Prescient Solutions in Chicago, a frequent guest on the Noon Business Hour, and Rachel Moretti, who is a TikToker, influencer, a recent guest on the Entrepreneur Friday segment on the Noon Business Hour, and by Matt Wren from VRAR Chicago, and Paige Serena, a TikTok user who has built a business using that social media platform. Matt, I want to begin with you by just talking about just the nature of TikTok and what makes this particular social media platform different from, say, Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. And is it really the algorithm that makes it distinctive?
I think the big thing that makes it different is just the way that it's used. You start immediately, open it up, you are in video. So there's no static pictures. When you turn it on, first thing you're watching a video. They're generally short form videos. I believe you open directly into what's called the For You page. So it's content that's basically being curated based on your interests, assuming you do have a history of using it previously. It obviously tracks what you've watched, and it presents you like content based on what you've spent time watching previously. And you can just scroll endlessly watching videos. It is very, very addictive, and I think that's probably the main reason that it's as popular as it is.
And for an entire generation of users, it seems like TikTok is TV to them. For those of us who grew up and you get home from school and turn on like cartoons on Channel 32 and just vegging out and just watching TV, that is TikTok for a lot of people, and that is going to change. It's already changing the way people consume media, but that is going to that change is going to become more pronounced and more profound as that TikTok generation grows into the advertiser-friendly demo.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where the question is really is, what age is appropriate to be using this? That's one of the questions that we should probably talk about today, because it is very addictive. I mean, it is a I'm trying to remember what this is, a cortisol hit. Like as you're just constantly scrolling, getting new things that are interesting to you. So the addictive nature to it is kind of scary, especially when you start talking about kids, because as I've just heard someone say as we were prepping for this meeting, you just turn it on and all of a sudden it's 3 hours later and you realize you've been scrolling for that whole time because they're short form videos and you can just keep watching and watching and watching. And yeah, that'll definitely lead into, advertising and other ways of doing influence as well.
Now, I consider myself a bit of a digital native, but my first entry into social media was getting a Facebook account at the age of 28. I was out of college for 6 years at that point, and I felt, mentally I was prepared for it, even though Facebook has evolved a great deal since then. Paige and Rachel, can you describe, your relationship with TikTok before you became an influencer, before you used it as a means of building a business and a brand? Describe day one of logging in and seeing what TikTok is.
Yeah, so I actually feel like it starts at like day -50. I don't think a lot of people know that TikTok originally was an app called Musical.ly. I have a younger brother. He's 7 years younger than me, so I try to kind of stay in tune with those trends. And he was posting on that, and it was like a dancing app, is what I would call it. And they changed Musical.ly into what TikTok became into. And so I remember I was hearing people were getting on TikTok, and I was like, okay, what is this? I got on, and I immediately, kind of like you were saying, 3 hours later, and you're like, okay, wait, I didn't even know what this was, and I'm already kind of sucked in. And so that kind of turned into my algorithm came really specific into what I was liking. The videos were just so spot on. I was liking, it seemed like everything. And I would say about a year later is when I was like, okay, I want to make my own TikToks and see what I can do with this. And it was very Chicago focused, and it ended up that one of the first videos I posted started going viral. So I kind of just rolled with it after that. But it was kind of interesting to see how it came from like this dancing musically, like a 15-second, app, into what it is now, where you can actually upload videos up to 10 minutes. So it's been a cool thing to see.
And then Rachel, when you signed on for the first time and jumped into the app, how long did it take for you to go from just scrolling videos to creating content yourself?
So my experience was a little bit different than Paige's because my husband used to work a lot in China. So when he came over, he was like, hey, this really awesome app is kind of like booming. We should take a look at it. And it was more like location based. So when I first logged in, I noticed it was a lot of maybe like 10 to 15-year-olds on the app, and it kind of freaked me out a little bit because I was like, this is not really the age demographic that I really want to interact with. So I kind of took a little bit of a hiatus from TikTok due to that experience. And then about a year or so later, I logged back into it just because I heard that it was a great way to grow. It was 2020. There wasn't very much to do. And that's kind of when it spiraled for me. And it was more Chicago-based, a little bit more of an older age demographic, and that's when the constant scrolling began personally for me, just because it was showing me a bunch of really awesome places to go in Chicago, which is what my TikTok count is focused on.
Now, Jerry, Rachel brings up a very important point, and that is this is a product that is owned by a Chinese company called ByteDance. A number of state governments have already instituted bans on using the TikTok app on government-owned phones on grounds of cybersecurity. But before we go into the larger discussion over national security and TikTok, I think there needs to be a discussion about just how much we share on social media and who is out there and what they can do with the information you present to compromise passwords and more.
Yeah, absolutely. Every social media application accumulates information on you, personally identifiable information, information that you probably don't want out on the internet, but every single one of them collects it. The difference is Facebook and Instagram and these others collect about 20 different items, right? TikTok collects 78 or more and continues to gather more and more information. They'll gather anything that you type into their application. So names, addresses, phone numbers, your credit card information, any type of payment information. If you go to a third-party website on their app, within their app, it accumulates all the information that you do there. So absolutely every piece of data that you type into that application is kept. Now, that's not so dissimilar from other social media applications. Facebook also collects information from third-party applications, and you don't even have to be logging into them from the Facebook application, right? But the difference is the amount of data that they keep, they control, or they claim to keep and control, right? And there is some ability, because they're US-based and because the data is here, for the government to look at that and make sure that they're doing what they say. Over in China, there's no ability for us to do that. So the thing that you really have to be aware of is your data is out there, right? There's been opportunities, and I get calls from different organizations asking me to do background searches and things for organizations, and the first thing I do is go to social media accounts and even accounts like Pinterest and stuff, where you can go and find out their individual likes and things of that nature. So your entire personality is kept by these different organizations.
Now, Matt, on the subject of the algorithm and what it can do to your mental health, there have been a number of moral panics about technology over the course of the decades. That kids are using Walkmans too much, they're listening to the radio too loud. What are they listening to? And then you can look back on that and say, well, that was a silly thing to be worried about. But we're starting to get some research on just the profound effect that endless scrolling can have on your mental health. And I think for those of us who came into it late, may not really realize that, if you're 12 or 13 and social acceptance is your world, we all remember what high school was like, of course, TikTok provides an opportunity for people to either torment you or for you to torment somebody else.
Definitely, the opportunities are there for cyberbullying, and that's a concern. That's something that needs to be watched. The one thing that you kind of realize this with social media, which I always find interesting, if you're cyberbullying somebody, there's a record of it. Like this, it's not like it's it's anonymous to a certain degree, but really not. Like as he mentioned, everything is tracked. Your identity is tied to the profile, so it's not so much the cyberbullying that's the concern, at least for me. Particularly with younger kids, their brains are still developing. When you are scrolling like that, it is messing with your brain chemistry. This is an addictive activity, just like gambling, to a certain degree, like alcohol or drugs. You are basically becoming addicted to what's happening in your brain, the chemicals being released as you're scrolling. Now, as you're older, again, it's, I won't say that the addiction is necessarily only tied to kids. It can happen to adults too, but it's an addictive activity that you have to be concerned about. When it comes to the algorithm, and specifically like you had mentioned, there was always the concern about video games or about watching too much TV or violent movies. You got to realize that, as he mentioned, with these algorithms on social media, and it's not just TikTok, it's Facebook or Instagram too, they are tracking what you look at. And they are tracking what everybody looks at. And then they're saying, okay, hey, you spent 5 seconds on this video and that video and that video, and everybody else who spent 5 seconds on those videos, they're interested in these other ones. So it's going to constantly feed into the things that it's measured you're likely to be interested in. So it's much more targeted, which is also what kind of makes it a little bit more dangerous.
And you said, next thing you know, it's 3 hours, and you've been staring at your phone that entire time. Now, there have been some safeguards being put into place where they will give you a reminder and say, look, it's been an hour, maybe you should go outside and touch grass. But you also have to say, I'm under the age of 18, and I did not exactly fall off the turnip truck. And if somebody says, I remember way back when, if somebody said, are you this age, or are you 21, because this is content meant for an older person, you just say yes and move on. So I would imagine it's a guardrail, but probably not that effective of a guardrail.
Right, and that's one of the points that I would say wherever possible, parents really need to be involved, and they need to be watching. I'm a parent. I have 2 teenage daughters. I don't let them use social media. The one who's in high school, we kind of gave her the choice of what one social media account do you want. But that was like, we don't let them use social media.
Welcome to MySpace.
Right. But, and that was like, that's a very big concern. And that's why, again, as a parent, you really do have to watch that because, yeah, everyone knows that if there's a kid saying, oh, are you 18? Are you available to, yeah, they're just going to click yes. So that's not really a good guardrail. There's other ways to do age verification that they could be enforcing. Like you could force a credit card, force somebody to enter a credit card and do a verification based on that. There's lots of ways that they could do it. It's just a matter of, are they really incentivized at this point to actually do the age verification?
Yeah, another opportunity is facial recognition. You can do facial recognition to determine age of an individual, and that's been suggested to multiple social media organizations or social, or application sites. Another concern, though, with the kids is, TikTok was actually fined back in 2019 for the Child Data Records Information Act. I don't know the exact name of it, but yeah, they were collecting too much information. Another issue they had is whenever a person was getting on, it would show anybody else that was on at the same time within a 50-mile radius. That became pretty scary with child abduction and the risk of different types of threats to individuals, not only kids.
It's interesting we had this conversation about like just how much more savvy we are about your digital footprint and the life you leave behind, because 30 years ago, my first entry into any type of social media was I got an AOL account, and you logged in, and the next thing you know, you were chatting with people about favorite TV shows and stuff like that, and that was the Wild West. And all that we know now about who might be lurking on the other end of the screen, it's amazing that we got out of that alive, quite frankly. But Jerry, on the subject of your data being available, and now that we have AI in the picture, and how does AI make someone a hacker or someone who wants to do ill with your data, make them more sophisticated?
They have every piece of information about you. So, I mean, AI itself, all they really have to do is go in to chatbot or different, types of applications and give them a name and a location of somebody, and it will go out there and on its own search all of the background information. Then they just start asking questions. How would I talk to this person? What are their likes? What are their dislikes? The different information, and it's easy to target. It's easy to find somebody.
Now, Rachel and Paige, you walk these TikTok streets, and you've both developed a great deal of success using this application. Before we talk about the success story, what kind of street smarts do you apply to your digital presence?
Well, I can start. I know for me, TikTok can be so personal, where you feel like you really need to share every little detail and aspect about yourself, because the difference between, let's say Instagram is it's not as personal, I feel like, as TikTok, because it is that front-facing camera and you're just pretending to talk to whoever you speak to. But a word of caution is never place your location of where you're at, especially if you're live streaming. I have seen videos where they say, oh, you can never find me, I'm in a remote, weird location, and then this other TikToker who specializes in showing how easily you can find someone will basically do this weird, type of research to show not only exactly where they're at, but their move of how they got there, and this just really wild, crazy amount of stalking, so to say. So I think you have to just be so careful as you're divulging a lot of your information, because although it is connecting people in a lot of aspects, it's also a little bit of a scary place to be when it comes to hacking and just really awful people that are trying to take your data and your information.
And then what do you do to kind of just make sure you keep your head in a swivel walking down the digital street?
Absolutely. And I think it's honestly like a question of, do you want to be relatable or do you want to be safe? And I think you see a lot of people oversharing on TikTok for the sake of relatability. And you see these videos, and I like them myself. I mean, they're great. But you can tell that there's a compromise of their, personal lives or their privacy or security that I don't want to give up. And I think that's something that I valued a lot going through my journey. Is I think you never want to post in real time. You definitely want to make sure that you're being very cognizant of how people could even perceive what you're posting, and wanting to make sure that people are not, kind of outsmarting you. And I think it's also just important to, you can share a lot, but there's ways to do it in ways that are safe. And I think that's something that I've been very cognizant of. And my parents, of course, always are telling me, please don't share where you're at. And I think that's something where I'm like, yeah, I totally get the implications, even like what Rachel was saying. You see some really crazy stories of people finding out where you live. And I mean, that actually happened to me, where someone commented on my video like, hey, I think I saw you in your apartment. And I'm like, okay, you shouldn't have commented that. So there's just so many different, scenarios of how easy it is to be tracked or to, compromise your privacy or security. And I think it's just really important to kind of stay on top of that.
Now, we talk about how addictive the platform can be just from an endless scrolling perspective, but I think TikTok, much like every other social media application, it gives you something that you did not have before, and that is a voice, and it's a platform. And I like to say that in the times before social media, if you wanted to get attention, you had to be especially good looking. You had to be able to act. You had to sing. You had to dance. And if you had none of those qualities, there was always radio. But now, now we're in a situation where if you have a Facebook account, if you have a Twitter account, if you have TikTok, and you have presence, you can jump the line. You succeed in the largest free market of the world of billions of people, and if you can get their attention, then that's a talent that is as powerful as being an Academy Award-winning actor or someone who can sing. So when you took the turn from being a TikTok participant and scrolling to saying, I think this is an opportunity to showcase what I like and what I'm interested in. When did that begin, and how'd you go about doing it?
Well, for me, I have a huge passion on showing restaurants, like mom and pop restaurants that you may or may not know. And I started very closely during 2020 when a lot of these mom and pop restaurants were on the brink of closing just because of the pandemic. So once like the end of 2020 came about and 2021 came about, some restaurants had reached out to me, and one in particular was looking to get more reservations for their brunch menu. And I came in, I did some really short form content for them, posted a video, and it happened just to go viral. It got like over 100,000 views in like 2 hours, which is insane. And I remember talking to the owner of the restaurant, and he just started sobbing because he was just like, wow, if I could get a couple of you to come in and, you know, showcase another part of my menu and get my reservations up, you know, my family can be okay. My restaurant won't have to close. And that's not always the case. Like, I'm not going to say that TikTok can change all your problems and make, you know, you can get 100,000 views instantaneously, because it's changed so much. There's so much many people on there and a lot more, you know, people that you have to go up against. But I think that's the beautiful side of TikTok, is you can showcase places that are on the brink of closing or that need a little bit more light shown on them, and it's able to get to that right audience.
And then, Paige, in your experience, when did you make the turn from TikTok consumer to not only a content creator, but a TikTok storyteller?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my approach is a little bit more cynical than Rachel's, actually. And it's funny because I was seeing a lot of content on TikTok that were restaurants that were behind huge restaurant groups that had millions of dollars already that seemed to be over promoted. And honestly, when I went to some of these spots, I was like, I don't even think they're that great. And so my idea was like, I kind of had a light bulb. I'm like, I think there's a gap that people can fill in highlighting more of those mom and pop restaurants, smaller businesses, family owned restaurants, and things that don't get as much light kind of shown on them. And that was the first video I posted, was like, I started a series like a don't go here, go there instead. And I just highlighting places that didn't get enough recognition. And I think people appreciated the fact that there was someone that wanted to shine a light on restaurants that didn't get as much recognition. And that kind of turned into my platform of like highlighting all over Chicago, not just downtown, but you want to see Andersonville, you want to see the south side of Chicago, whether that's Bronzeville, Hyde Park. There are so many different components, and I wanted to really capitalize on that because I feel like I had a lot of different experiences in those neighborhoods, and it kind of came easy to me to do that, and it was fun to connect with different people. And I feel like I've been in Chicago almost 10 years, and just seeing the way that I'm able to connect with people that I would have never thought I would have met or matched with through TikTok, and having that like autonomy of creating the content that I want to create, and you know, meeting people that are like-minded has been really cool.
And even though we have four people on this panel who come from wildly different backgrounds, and it seems like everybody has a similar story, because if you are starting your own TikTok as a brand extension, this is my way of shining a light on X, Y, or Z, it's very similar to hanging up your shingle in any other practice. Like if you think you're comfortable enough to jump out into the world as a TikTok influencer, what's the difference between becoming a consultant in your field of expertise?
That's where they're going, right? I mean, consultants are starting up businesses within TikTok. Last year, TikTok was responsible for over $14 billion worth of revenue to small businesses, and added over $24 billion to the U.S. GDP. So that's a positive. Those are the things that aren't being talked about by the government when they're talking about shutting it down. Now, there are a lot of vulnerabilities and risks that may justify it being, you know, sanctioned, but I don't think there's anything that justifies it being shut down.
And then also, Matt, is there anything, you know, inside the algorithm? Obviously, everyone's algorithm is proprietary tech, but who's to say that you can't come up with an American TikTok? Or because also American social media companies have tried to replicate what TikTok does, because now Facebook is nothing but Reels and Instagram is nothing but short videos. So everyone's trying to get on board that train. You can recreate the algorithm, especially if via legislation, let's say TikTok does shut down, it's not sold, someone else can find a way to recreate it.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember Vine. I don't know whatever happened to that application, but that was basically TikTok as far as I remember prior to there being a TikTok. The big thing that was different with TikTok, which is funny because a lot of us who, I've use TikTok. I started using TikTok. I have an account. I've never posted. But I was noticing, people doing these dances. And that was the whole thing that you sort of started it as. And again, I didn't realize that was actually how it started, but that was what you would see on TikTok all the time when it started. Now you don't see that as much, but it's still there. But yes, I mean, anyone else could build another app that does the same thing. TikTok is really not that different. As a social media company, it's social media. It is, there's Instagram, there's Facebook, there's Twitter. Take your pick. They're all using algorithms to try to post to you. You're the product. Let's face it, in those applications, you are the product. The difference is that I've seen with TikTok, and you see it with Facebook too. Like Facebook has Facebook Shops. TikTok has TikTok Shops. They're building, they are a net positive in terms of business. They give people a voice that don't have it. I'll say one of the things that I think is really amazing about TikTok is how fast you can get news, real time. I mean, I found out more about what was going on in Ukraine, Israel, and North Carolina. I mean, I've got my news feed is the first thing that happens on my mobile phone when I open it. TikTok was faster at getting that news. It's amazing how quick it is, and it gives, to your point, anybody a voice. Anyone gets a megaphone.
And I think that's one of the things about TikTok that really makes it appealing. Like any other form of new technology, I mean, and you're watching this now saying, yes, he's going to talk about the Titanic, but I am going to talk about the Titanic. And that is going back to 1912. You could hear the distress call from the Titanic in real time. The ship had a 5,000-watt transmitter, and people were picking up the distress calls in New York. That's how the newspapers knew the ship was sinking and had sunk. And that continued throughout the 20th century. You could listen on radio. You could hear the Nazis attack Great Britain in real time. And then television comes along, and all of a sudden, the civil rights marches in the 1950s, which were written up in the newspaper, you could see the dogs attacking the protesters. You could see the fire hoses being turned on people. It became a very visceral experience. You introduce satellites, all of a sudden the Gulf War is starting in your living room in 1991. And here we are with TikTok. You can see what's happening in North Carolina. You can see what's happening in Ukraine in real time. And that's just one of the many ways in which all technology, especially this technology, can impact society.
Some of the concern, though, is the information that you're receiving from TikTok real, right? And many times there are people suggesting that that's being created with AI, that it's being deep faked, and there are examples of that where it's not the real information, where they're trying to give you a spin on things. And the concern with that again is the fact that it's owned by China.
And I think also there's a level of savvy that we all have to have too, because when we have a mental picture of disinformation on social media, we imagine there's a troll farm somewhere in Russia, and they are creating disinformation or false news or whatever you want to call it, and it's all going in one direction. But I have discovered, especially over this electoral cycle, that disinformation or information that is out of context, people will believe it. Regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, people will believe it because it sounds right. And it's not just unsophisticated yokels passing along. It's people with PhDs. It's people who have served in public office. It's people who are in line for being on the Supreme Court. Everyone falls victim to this trap of, this sounds good, I'm going to pass it along regardless of its veracity.
Well, I think you have to keep in mind the way to grow and monetize on TikTok in particular is to get someone to stop scrolling, right? So a lot of the times people will say these wild, outlandish things at the beginning just so you stop and you're like, wait, what does this mean? Or what's going on with this? And then more than likely at the end, they'll be like, just kidding, this is not really what I meant to say. Or they've grabbed their attention and they're like, stay tuned, subscribe to see my next video, or follow me for my next video. So you also have to keep that in mind as well, is people are trying to monetize and grow and make a brand for themselves. So although you may be seeing some wild, outlandish things, you have to kind of think about it before you necessarily believe it.
I was going to say, it's the headline versus the article. Like, everyone reads the headline. How many people actually read the article? It's the same concept. Up front, something is there to grab your attention. That's the whole point of that thing, is to grab your attention. And then you read the article and you get all the details. And that's something that, again, traditionally a lot of people don't really do. They look at the headline and say, okay, cool, I know what's going on. But to your point, Yeah, I would say, especially with the videos, they do serve you what you like. They know what you like already, and they serve you more of that. That's kind of the point of the algorithm and how it works. But yeah, it is there to grab your attention, and the monetization comes from how long people watch your stuff.
And this is something that has been going on throughout the history of communication. We talk about the early days of radio. The FCC came into being in part because when spoken word radio was coming out in the 1920s and 30s, there was a guy, medicine show, a patent medicine quack, Dr. John R. Brinkley, who owned radio stations. And for 24 hours a day, he would have people come on and talk about the curative properties of goat glands. And people spent thousands of dollars on Dr. Brinkley's goat glands, and of course it was all bunk. And the federal government got involved. And Dr. John R. Brinkley lost his licenses, and he skedaddled to Mexico, where he set up 100,000-watt radio stations right there on the Texas-Mexico border, so he can continue his patent medicine business. So people lying, people selling products of dubious quality has been a problem since the beginning of people talking to each other. So, Paige, when it comes to ethical scrolling and ethically stopping somebody, where's the win in terms of providing an actual service that someone finds value in, and just keeping the scammers away?
I think that's an interesting question, especially when it comes to someone like me who creates content specifically for Chicago, right? And I think that you have to rely on your audience to build that trust. I think you know what you are intending to do and where your heart lies in the content that you create. To Rachel's point, there's a lot of things you see like rage bait, where you want people to comment and interact to boost your views and to boost your monetization. And I think that by being as authentic as possible, you kind of create and curate that community of trust within your following and your audience. And I think that's what most creators are looking to do. You want your audience to feel like they can trust you or to listen to you and know that you will not tell them, you won't steer them in the wrong direction. You're giving them factual advice, sometimes based in opinion, but based in things that I think other people care about. On a larger scale, I think it's interesting now. You see a lot of TikTok, even Twitter, doing like the fact checking, which I think is really important. And you'll see an outlandish video, and then beneath it'll be like, this is not actually true. And I think that's been really kind of comical to see in real time kind of play out, because you see people trying to get away with things, and it's like, no, not quite. And it's cool to see that. I think there's a lot of work to be done with like the algorithms and how different social media platforms kind of check and ensure that the right information is going around. But just on a local scale, for someone like me, it's definitely just really having, trying to be authentic and making sure that your audience feels comfortable and can trust you. And I think that's the biggest part of it.
When it comes to finding a way to maybe tighten up some of the issues we've talked about with TikTok, I mean, back in radio, you had, the FDA came in and kind of chased a lot of the patent medicine people away. There was a legislative remedy for all these rip-off medicines that were out there. The FCC came into being to enforce some standards on what you can say and what you could advertise on radio. The National Association of Broadcasters had their own standards about what was acceptable and what was not. Jerry, there has been an effort to get ByteDance to divest TikTok to continue operations in the U.S. But are there other legislative remedies that could really impact some of the things about TikTok that are unethical and do cause real harm, while at the same time preserving the good stuff about it?
In short, no. The problem is the internet is still the Wild West. The servers exist in different parts of the world. If you take one down, it comes up somewhere else. There's so little that we can do, right? Even the ban, which is supposed to take effect as of January 19th, if they have not divested their ownership into TikTok by then, even if that happens, they're still going to be out there, and there's no problems with companies continuing to use it for advertising or to put their information out there. They just can't have the application being downloaded from the App Store or from Play. So people are still going to get it. How do you control that? There's really no way at this point in time. China and some other communist type countries do have shut-off valves to the internet. So if they don't want you to get something, everything goes to a single router someplace and they just drop the traffic. So if they don't want you to go to a specific site, you don't see it. We can't do that here in the States. Although back during the Obama period, there were some proposals on creating similar types of traps within the network connectivity where everything would come into specific routers, which would allow us to control them for national security reasons. But short of doing something like that, there's really little to anything we can do to control the content or usage of the internet.
And Matt, this is the future. I mean, this is not something that, or the present actually. It'll become increasingly the future. The algorithm. It not only governs TikTok, it governs what you scroll on Instagram. It governs what you see on Netflix or Disney Plus. I mean, the algorithm will curate content for everybody. So we have to learn to live within this reality.
And I mean, that's part of the concern. And to get to something that you spoke to a little bit earlier, buyer beware a little bit. So that's part of the concern that I have with kids using it is kids don't really have that everything I'm seeing isn't real thought pattern. Whereas adults, we're a little bit more skeptical. We've learned, basically. We've been burned a couple times, so we've learned maybe that everything you see on the internet isn't accurate and isn't real. And so kids need to learn that. That's one of the concerns I have with younger users. And the concern, with the algorithm particularly is, okay, well, if China's in control of this, then China controls the algorithm too. So they can sway a little more of the types of content you see and what you don't see. When it comes to the concept of should there be bans and should there be stuff like this in place though, I mean, let's face it, social media at this point is media. This is a First Amendment issue. You really have to be careful if you're starting to tell people, no, we're going to shut you down. We're going to shut down this channel. Because ultimately, okay, well, if we allow them to shut down TikTok, then what says they can't shut down Facebook or Meta or Twitter? Or where is it just because it was in China, or is it, well, no, this was used harmfully potentially. I don't know if there's any actual evidence of how harmful things were. So they're all using algorithms. They're all doing basically the same thing. But the question is, if you're going to ban it, where does the ban stop? The concept of who will guard the guards if there's truth checking.
Now, Rachel and Paige. I mean, let's flip the script on this one. That we talked about all the issues that existed with radio and TV, but at the same time, radio and TV made stars of people who could not be stars in vaudeville or in theater or in movies, and you guys had a great deal of success with TikTok that probably would not have existed if TikTok was not here. Rachel, you told us in the business hour a couple of weeks ago that you tried to be a model and they said no. And so you said, you know what, I'm doing my own thing, and you did your own thing on TikTok and were very successful. So you see people who want to be influencers now. What is your suggestion to them? If they want to go into TikTok and build a social media business out of their presence, what advice do you impart to them, not only being successful in stopping the scroll, but also understanding all the other risks that exist in TikTok today?
Well, I think and I know I said this previously, just be unique to yourself. There's so many different other people that are probably having the same issue or problem that you're having, and you're giving them a voice. They may be too afraid to speak out about it. Like, for example, me being only 5'5", being told by a bunch of modeling agencies, you're too short to do fashion or do modeling, and I walked in Chicago Fashion Week. I was able to cover Chicago Fashion Week because of my platform. So it gives those little people a voice and a platform to be able to say, not only can I do this, but I can change the norm. I think that's the beautiful thing about social media, TikTok in particular, is it gives a voice to the voiceless.
Now, Paige, when you decided to develop a social media presence, were you yourself, or was there somebody you tried to emulate before you were able to, develop your own voice?
No, I think to my point earlier, I was seeing content that I didn't necessarily like, and I was like, okay, well, that's going to be my catalyst for how I actually do my content differently to that. And I tell people that there's no niche too narrow, too detailed. Like, there is a seat for everyone if you can make a name for yourself. And I think it even goes outside of TikTok and having different opportunities that you can create for yourself through having your own platform and through kind of advocating for yourself and having your own voice. And I think that's the really special thing about it. You don't have to have tons of followers, but people recognize you. And I think that's something that people should really kind of keep in mind when they decide to do it. Put yourself out there. It's a greater, reward than the risk, in my opinion.
And it seems like the important thing is just to be yourself, because I would imagine on TikTok there are probably a million Mr. Beast clones out there trying to break through, and just be yourself and provide your unique insight. You have a lot to offer, and you don't have to eat light bulbs just because somebody else is doing that.
Yeah.
That's bad advice. That's good advice in many other contexts of life, but especially social media. I've stunned the crowd.
Yeah, I guess the thing I'd like to point out is with all the vulnerabilities and everything that's being talked about within TikTok, again, remembering that most of those vulnerabilities also exist in Facebook and Instagram and all of the other ones. The things that you can control are your phone, right? Make sure that when you're installing the application that you're not installing it. You're installing it directly from the Play Store or from the iOS. You're selecting the least amount of privilege for those devices. They'll want as many as 75 different things to be accumulating from your data, but you don't have to allow that. Implement the multi-form factor authentication. Keep your phone system updated so that the vulnerabilities don't show. Install an antivirus solution on your phone. How many of us have an antivirus on our phone? Okay, one.
I do.
All right. So, antivirus is dead. I mean, it only catches 30% of the known viruses that are out there, but that's 30% more, right? But what it does do is it looks at the heuristic footprints of malware to determine if something is going wrong. So you have the ability to install these applications on your phone to secure yourself. So protect yourself as much as you can. And as was mentioned, don't talk about your location. Don't enter that. Turn off geolocations on your phone so people can't find you.
And then lastly, I think, just talking about going back to kids, and that is, we'll wrap it up here. It's an opportunity for you to have a voice, for your child to have a voice, but at the same time, there's a lot of bad stuff and a lot of bad people out there. So as far as parental involvement is concerned, what can we do to make sure, if we have a parent who's got a kid who's got, a phone growing out of their ear, what can we do as parents to make sure they stop scrolling or make sure they start scrolling later on?
I was going to say, I know for me personally, my mom is not on social media at all, but I remember my first time getting MySpace, and it was so addicting to me. I would run home from school, run completely up to my room, talk to people from all around the world, and it was so over-encompassing. So she regulated my time on social, and she put me in a lot of different, dance classes, all this kind of stuff. But I think just talk to your children about the risks, even though she didn't necessarily be on social media herself, she still told me these are the things you need to be cautious about. Don't tell people about your location. Don't divulge a lot of information. So if you have those honest, communication with your child and just be more aware, I think that could go a long way.
I think parents also, and I think this is something that I've seen, at least for me, since the pandemic, and you see a lot of parents not as involved as they were, in my opinion, previously, and you see kids getting on TikTok for the first time and they're 7 years old and they're making these dance videos, and it's great, it's fun for them, but there has to still be a limit, and I think it's good that you see some apps installing different things and mechanisms okay, set a time limit for this app for a certain amount of time per day, or set a parental control or a password lock. But I don't think a lot of people utilize those tools. And I think that's important because, especially for me, I mean, I grew up, same to Rachel, I grew up online, I grew up on Facebook, MySpace, I'd get home from school and that's all I wanted to do. And I think there was, at least I had a little bit more structure back then, I feel, to kind of regulate the amount of time I spent online. But I have younger cousins now that I see that are online for, the entire afternoon once they get home from school. And I think actual parental involvement is important. And I also think utilizing what social media allows in terms of the time limits and things like that is also really important. So I think just kind of, it's a two-way street.
And then Matt, as the parent who enforces these social media limits, your perspective?
Oh, first of all, I'm just going to say I'm really happy I grew up at a time where there wasn't social media. Like, plain and simple. I'd be frightened of what would have been there. No, with that said, I mean, parents have to be involved. Like that, plain and simple. As parents, you need to be involved. You have to know what your kids are doing on social media. Yes, absolutely. Be the bad person who's monitoring their account, making sure they're not posting stuff they shouldn't post, making sure you're paying attention to what they're watching. It's a little bit of a two-sided blade here. Like, you don't want your kids to not be savvy. If you don't allow them to use it at all, then that's kind of detrimental at this point. Social media is a big part of just life nowadays. So if they're not aware of it, if they don't know about it, if they don't even know how to use it or what it can do, well, that's almost as bad as overuse, because it will be something that's going to be important to business, to education. It's important for those things. They need to be aware of it and know what it is and know how to use it. But yeah, as a parent, you absolutely need to be involved and set the limits and set whatever limits you as the parent are comfortable with, because you're the parent. That's what you should be doing.
And then Jerry, the cybersecurity perspective.
Luckily, I'm a geek. So I was able to monitor my children's phones and computers and see exactly what they were doing whenever they were doing it. And I would print out things that they did and put it on their nightstand in the morning saying, don't do this again or you won't have a phone. You won't have a computer. And my daughter still tells everybody about that. And I think there's a place for that, right? You have to be diligent in protecting your children, because there are all kinds of people out there who want to, get the data from them and use it in a nefarious way.
Well, I think we'll leave it there. Jerry Irvine, Rachel Moretti, Matt Wren, and Paige Serena, our all-star panel, talking about TikTok on trial, the good and the bad, and just the reality we live in. I'm Rob Hart, News Radio 105.9 WBBM. Of course, listen every afternoon or morning and afternoon between 10 and 3. And, of course, always listen to the Noon Business Hour, where you can hear their perspectives as we go through the day and go through life and try to live in this technologically advanced world that's always changing. So once again, thank you for your time and attention, and thank you for joining us today.